Smoke drifted sideways over the ridge. Comms were stalling. No one could see the flank collapse until it was too late. The lieutenant was shouting for aerial confirmation. But the drone feed kept lagging. A junior tech adjusted her headset, said nothing, and tapped twice into the backup thermal overlay. One heat signature was wrong. She circled it. No one looked. So she rerouted the signal and keyed it directly to fire control. The shell landed 6 seconds later. The line held. No one asked who called it. She didn't offer. The rooftop gravel shifted faintly beneath her boots as Captain Elena Ramirez stepped toward the edge. Her shadow long across the broken concrete. She paused without urgency, resting her gloved hand against a rusted vent pipe, while her eyes followed the distant curl of smoke rising from the city's northern district. The sound of sporadic gunfire echoed between high rises, far enough to ignore by protocol. Too close to ignore, in truth. Her peacekeeping armband, faded and frayed along the edge, clung to her sleeve with Velcro that no longer sealed cleanly. The name tag on her uniform was scratched half white from sun and wear, and the plastic ID card clipped to her front plate was dulled by repeated handling. It reflected nothing. Below, the courtyard had emptied. 2 trucks idled at the rear gate, their drivers smoking behind dented doors. Watching pigeons scatter in the alley. Inside the building, a briefing had just ended. No one had called for her. No one ever did. She stood still and unnoticed. The wind moving only the corner of a torn map pinned under 2 chipped plastic markers on the rooftop table. The edges of the map curled from moisture, and the city grid printed across it bore no resemblance to the present blockades drawn in red grease pencil. Bridge access marked unknown. One sector was scratched out entirely. The building itself leaned forward as if listening, its windows half-shuttered, blinds twisted or missing altogether. One window had been taped against weather with printer paper. The flag on the far wall, once blue and white with the mission crest, now hung in limp folds beneath a light that no longer worked. The air inside had smelled of dust, printer toner, and evaporated coffee. Outside, it smelled like metal and heat. A lieutenant had brushed past her earlier on the stairs, boots fast and voice sharp. He had smirked as he passed, saying the unrest was noise, nothing actionable, that she should keep her head down until someone needed an interpreter. His tone had been casual, but the dismissal was deliberate. He didn't wait for a reply. She didn't offer one. He wore full kit and a sidearm. Her holster was empty. The capital had been tense for weeks, straining under curfews and protests. Whispers passed faster than orders. Her own reports had been logged and ignored. An advisory note she'd submitted 2 days earlier flagging unusual movement near the municipal fuel depots was never acknowledged. Now she watched the streets twist in heat shimmer. Their patterns wrong. Movement came in clumps, not flows. A bus stalled at an intersection and did not start again. Flags were torn from poles. People walked faster when they passed checkpoints. From the rooftop, Elena counted 6 intersections without visible patrols. She traced the lines with her gaze, not her hand. Below, 2 men argued beside an overturned fruit crate. A child watched from a doorway. Someone opened the roof access door and stepped into the light. Another officer, young and tight-lipped, glanced at her. Then down at the map, he hesitated, said something vague about updated grid sectors, then told her to stay visible and let the real units handle it. She nodded once. He left before she spoke. She stayed at the edge of the rooftop, one hand resting near her ID badge, the other relaxed at her side. The building behind her creaked as heat expanded the walls. Far off, another plume of smoke joined the first enter it. Somewhere beyond the skyline, radios had gone quiet. Elena didn't move. She had seen maps lie before. This one would too. She waited, not because she had been told to, because someone had to. The meeting room had once been a classroom. Chalkboards still lined the back wall, smudged with arithmetic and faded weather charts in a language she couldn't read. The desks were pushed into a corner and stacked like barricades that hadn't been needed yet. A banner for conflict resolution training hung above the windows, curling with humidity at the edges. Captain Elena Ramirez stood near the whiteboard, her notebook in hand. Listening to the local representative try to explain something about fuel distribution, one of the interpreters shifted beside her, working quickly to translate under his breath. The fans overhead turned in slow, tired circles. Sweat tracked behind her collar. Outside, the city groaned with summer heat and tension. Then the ground moved. Not a tremor, not the slow roll of heavy trucks, but a flat, concussive ripple that rattled every window in the frame. The interpreter flinched mid-word. A child screamed in the hallway. One of the old fluorescent lights dropped its cover with a clatter. The room held its breath for just a second before the shouting began, first in the hallway, then on the radio net, then through every doorway at once. Smoke bled upward past the window panes, thick and gray, not yet rising, but curling low. Somewhere beyond the school's rear wall, another explosion cracked the air. Closer this time. Too close. Elena pressed her hand to the radio, clipped on the interpreter's shoulder. Static. Then partial codes. Then nothing. She tried hers. The same. Another blast. Farther off. Rolled like thunder down the avenue. A soldier burst into the room. Barely 19. Still sweating under his helmet. Eyes too wide. He shouted that the convoy was gone. The compound was burning. No orders were coming. The lieutenant was dead or missing. The others had pulled out. He wanted to run. One of the civilians dropped a shopping bag by the door. Fruit and rice spilling out. The child beside him sobbed once, then went silent, clutching a worn stuffed animal at the shoulder. Another soldier yelled at Elena to give them something, anything, but she had no command slot. No authority. She didn't answer right away. She scanned the hallway, the broken glass, the terrified faces around her. Then she walked quickly to the north exit, stepped into the heat, and looked down the street, 2 blocks away. The old government records building stood intact, its stone walls blackened by time, but not yet touched by the fire. It had narrow entries, thick doors, angled windows for crossview. It could hold. Elena turned back, her voice low but direct. We move. Now. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. She pointed to the interpreters, told them to take point and keep the civilians close. One of the junior soldiers hesitated. She looked at him once. He followed. The street was chaos. Shops burned 3 intersections down. A transport vehicle lay on its side with its cargo door hanging open. They moved fast, but not in panic, ducking between parked cars and broken fences. Keeping low, Elena stayed to the side, watching windows, counting turns. Behind her, one soldier tripped, scraping his arm. She pulled him up without a word. Ahead, a woman carried her child over a pothole filled with glass. When they reached the records building, Elena tested the front door. It held. She ordered one soldier to clear the first floor, another to cover the rear. She stepped inside last, sweeping the stairwell with her empty sidearm holster still clipped to her belt. Dust coated the walls. The air smelled of paper and mildew. No one called her ma'am. No one saluted. But when she set down her bag and began moving furniture to the windows, the others joined her. A teenager followed her lead and began stacking chairs. A soldier muttered that someone needed to be in charge. Another said, quietly, that she already was. They didn't speak again for a while. They were too busy securing the only place left to hold. The records building had once been a place for paper permits, census logs, ledger books, long since forgotten. Now it was a shelter, a holdout with no name on any map. Dust floated through shafts of broken light, and Elena Ramirez moved through it with deliberate steps. Sleeves rolled, gear stripped to essentials. The others stood scattered, unsure whether to wait or act. No one knew who was in charge. But everyone kept looking at her. So she moved. She began with the windows. There were 7 along the front wall. 2, missing panes completely. The others cracked or warped from heat. She pointed to the most intact and gestured for a chair to be dragged beneath it. The youngest soldier, not older than 20, obeyed without speaking. Elena climbed up, braced one hand against the frame, and used her knife to pry loose the remaining glass. The metal snapped, then gave. She stepped down again and nodded to the soldier, who held the chair steady without being asked. Behind them, the interpreter named Farid knelt beside a wounded civilian on a low couch. The man had a leg wound deep, not arterial, but the bleeding was stubborn. Farid's scarf came off without hesitation. He used it to bind the leg, pressing gently but with practice. Elena handed him her water ration, already unsealed. He took it without comment and poured just enough to rinse the blood before tying the fabric tighter. On the far side of the room, a soldier cursed quietly as he yanked open a filing cabinet. It held nothing but crumbling folders. He slammed it shut and turned toward Elena with frustration in his voice. He said this place was useless, a paper grave, and that they should have kept moving. Another soldier, pacing near the stairwell, said they'd been safer on the street. Elena didn't argue. She just opened her map. It was folded twice over, the creases soft with wear. She laid it flat on a table near the door and oriented it with a cracked compass pulled from her breast pocket. The compass needle shook, then settled. She adjusted the map a few degrees and tapped the grid square, showing their position. The voices behind her softened. One of the civilians stepped closer, squinting at the symbols. Elena traced 2 fingers down a corridor marked with a red X. Then she drew a short line on the edge with her pen and circled it. No one asked what it meant. She didn't explain. She just moved to the next task. Rations were counted in silence. 7 civilians, 5 military, 1 wounded. She divided what they had into careful stacks on a blanket near the entry. A can of beans, a protein bar, a filtered water packet. Then again. When someone reached for a larger share, she didn't raise her voice. She looked once. The hand withdrew. A teenage boy, maybe 15, stood near the back door. His hands were clenched. His mother lay on a mat nearby, wrapped in a borrowed coat, her breathing uneven. Someone had told him to move her, to make room. He had refused. Elena walked over and knelt beside the woman, checked her pulse with 2 fingers, then touched the boy lightly on the shoulder. She told him not to move her. Not yet. He nodded and stayed. They cleared the 2nd floor slowly. Elena took point. The young soldier behind her with rifle low. The stairwell creaked under their weight. They passed rooms filled with disused shelves, long rotted paper, and scattered debris. At the far end, a narrow balcony gave a view down the alley. She marked it mentally: elevation, distance, line of sight, then motioned for a lookout to take position there. The soldier didn't speak. He settled in, checked his field of fire, and began his watch. By nightfall, the building had shape, not strength, not security, but shape, a rhythm. Elena moved between stations, checked field angles with her compass, rechecked comms with Farid on the rooftop. The radio barely worked. She rotated batteries between units, buying time. A child fell asleep with a boot under her head. The interpreter who had tied the scarf cleaned his hands on a torn page from a logbook and folded it into his pocket. The soldier who had shouted before now watched Elena without speaking. When she moved, he mirrored. No one called her captain. No one asked if she was in charge. But when a noise echoed from the far street, a loud engine, unfamiliar, they all looked to her. She didn't answer the glance. She stood, walked to the window, and listened. The noise passed. Faint, moving away. She went back to the map, rechecked the markers, and reset the compass beside it. The compass needle trembled, then found north again. Someone handed her a strip of bread and a cold packet of rations. She took it without thanks. They sat in a wide circle that wasn't planned but felt like one. In the silence, the group breathed together. No speeches, no commands, just tasks repeated, corners reinforced. One motion followed by another. They didn't need a flag. They had her. The rain started just after midnight. Steady and fine, tapping against the fractured windows like breath through a sieve. Inside the records building, most of the group had found sleep where they could on floor mats, under desk, pressed into corners where the air stayed warmest. The scent of blood still lingered, mixed with paper rot and old wiring. Captain Elena Ramirez sat against the far wall beside the interpreter they'd pulled in wounded. His breathing was rough, but regular now. His leg braced with 2 wood slats from a broken chair and wrapped in torn bandages. The scarf around the wound had darkened, dried, stiff. She hadn't replaced it. It was holding. She held a tin cup in her hand, half full of water. The surface didn't move. She hadn't touched it in hours. Across the room, near the crumbling stairwell, a young soldier leaned against the wall with his knees pulled to his chest. He whispered something soft, cracked, then again, louder. He said they'd been forgotten. That command had cut them loose. That nobody was coming. The words didn't rise enough to draw attention. He wasn't asking for comfort. He was naming what everyone had begun to fear. His voice trembled once, then stopped. No one responded. Elena didn't look at him, but she heard every word. She adjusted the collar of her jacket, leaned her head back against the wall, and closed her eyes for a breath. Not sleep, just stillness. A memory drifted up without warning. Another room, another deployment. A rural clinic they had helped rebuild 2 years ago, painted white with donated supplies and half the roof missing. She had stayed late to help distribute medical packets while the others left for dinner. She remembered patching up a child's foot with a clean bandage and a plastic smile sticker, watching his mother try not to cry in front of her. She'd filed the after-action report herself. Weeks later, the version that circulated through command bore no signature, no mention of civil affairs involvement. A footnote credited unspecified logistical assistance. She hadn't corrected it. There had been no space to. Now, with the storm tapping low over broken tile, Elena reached into the inner sleeve of her jacket and pulled out her map. It was folded tight, edges softened by sweat and rain, ink still holding along the ridgelines. She unfolded it just enough to see the circled marks, paths she had traced by memory and corrected by walking. The paper was stiff in the corners, nearly tearing at one fold. She laid it on her lap and rested a palm lightly against it. She didn't read it. She didn't need to. Beside her, the interpreter stirred. She adjusted the tourniquet tied with her old peacekeeping armband, now faded and torn. The fabric was soaked through and brown at the edges, but it held steady. She looked down at her cup. The water remained untouched. No one called her name. No one marked the moment. But she stayed. The first warning came not from the radio, but from the silence. Birds had been nesting under the roof eaves all week, chirping in the dark before dawn. That morning, there was nothing. No shuffle of wings. No scrape across the tile. Just quiet. Dense and still. Elena Ramirez was already dressed. Seated against the far wall near the stairwell, when the lookout on the second floor tapped twice against the pipe leading down, she stood without a word, nodded to the soldier across from her, and moved quickly through the dim hallway. The air smelled faintly of sweat and something metallic. She passed the civilians still sleeping in a tight cluster, careful not to make noise. One soldier followed her, stepping light. Another met her at the first floor window, rifle in hand, face tight with nervous tension. They had planned for this. Glass shards had been scattered across the main hallway overnight, spread thin across the tiles where the light didn't reach. Elena stepped around them now, eyes on the door. Furniture had been repositioned, desks stacked sideways. Chair legs broken off to form a low barricade near the base of the staircase. She'd used a piece of wire to brace the main doorknob from the inside. It wouldn't hold long, but it would delay. The first impact was muted. Not a full kick, just pressure. Testing. Then another. Louder. Then shouting in a dialect she didn't recognize. 3 quick cracks as someone fired into the doorframe. The wood didn't splinter, but the bolt shifted. She motioned with her hand. Left angle. Brace the side. The youngest soldier crouched low behind the desk line, weapon tight. Elena killed beside him, one hand on the wall for balance. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Another crack, louder this time, and the lock gave. The door burst open. The first figure through wore civilian clothes, face masked by a bandana. Rifle raised. He stepped directly onto the glass. The sound was unmistakable. Sharp and fast. The lookout fired once from the upper balcony, striking wide. Shouting erupted. Another attacker followed, ducking low. The firefight was brief but brutal. 4 shots. Then 2 more. Elena stayed low, guiding the fallback by hand, one soldier to the left stairwell, another to the corner wall. The interpreter moved too fast and took a round in the shoulder, slamming into the filing cabinet with a gasp. Elena dragged him behind the couch and pressed her hand to the wound. Warm blood soaked through the torn fabric. She didn't speak. She held pressure, nodded to the soldier beside her, and kept her grip steady. Then, Schaus. A civilian broke from the back room, panicked, running straight into the corridor. A soldier turned, rifle up, finger trembling on the trigger. He shouted something Elena couldn't hear. The woman screamed. The soldier flinched. Elena stood. In one motion, she reached forward and took the rifle by the barrel, pulling it down. Her voice firm and quiet. Not this one. Not like this. The soldier stepped back, breathing hard. She didn't scold him. She didn't need to. She returned the rifle to his hands and walked forward. One of the attackers had fallen at the door. Another lay slumped by the stairwell. A third crouched behind the entry bench, hands up, wide-eyed, breathing sharp and shallow. He was no older than 16. His weapon lay discarded, untouched, near the wall. Elena stopped 3 steps away and looked at him. He didn't speak. Neither did she. The soldier behind her muttered that they should finish it. Others looked away. Elena didn't. She said only one word. Alive. They tied his hands gently. No blows. No shouting. Just rope from a supply kit and a torn strip of blanket for his eyes. They placed him near the back wall, away from the others. Elena ordered water brought to him. Then food. Someone whispered that they didn't have enough. She replied that this wasn't about enough. It was about the line. The interpreter groaned in pain. Elena crouched beside him, checked the bleeding, pressed her palm once to his arm, then moved to reinforce the front hallway. They reset the barricade. The broken chair legs were repositioned. A new wedge was cut from a bookshelf. Elena wiped blood from her hand with the edge of her sleeve and returned to the door. The sun had risen fully now, casting harsh light through the broken windows. Dust floated in gold shafts above the wreckage. Shell casings rolled slightly on uneven floorboards. The group moved slower now. Quieter. No one spoke unless they had to. Elena's peacekeeping patch, once blue and white, was now streaked with blood and gray ash. She didn't remove it. She didn't clean it. She knelt beside the window, one hand resting near the edge of the map, still taped to the wall. Outside, the street was empty again. Inside, nothing had broken that could not be held. The signal cracked through mid-morning, faint and uneven, caught between bursts of static. Elena Ramirez turned up the gain and leaned in. One hand pressed lightly against the headset. She closed her eyes to focus, listening for tone first, then words. It was a convoy. Friendly call sign. Less than 5 kilometers out. The voice was clipped. Professional. Too far to hear her reply. The frequency cut in and out just enough to give coordinates. No mention of her team. No indication they knew the building was occupied. She lowered the radio slowly and placed it on the table beside her. The map was already spread open, her fingers resting at the crease where she'd traced the road leading north. The building wasn't marked. It had been decommissioned 2 years earlier. On the official overlay, it didn't exist. She stood without speaking and walked to the edge of the room where the young girl, barely 12, was sitting beside her injured brother. Elena knelt down. Her voice was low, steady. She explained that people were coming in large vehicles, too fast to stop if they didn't know what was here. She asked the girl if she could help with something important. The girl nodded before Elena even finished. They climbed to the rooftop together. The sky was pale and bright, the air carrying the sharp scent of exhaust and burned metal. Elena tied a strip of red cloth to the base of the radio antenna, tight against the post so it wouldn't flap. The signal had to be deliberate, not disparity. She walked the girl to the north corner of the roof and placed a flare in her hand. It was old. Military issue. The casing scratched but functional. Elena showed her how to brace it, how to twist and aim it skyward. The girl's hands shook. Elena cupped them briefly in her own. Only if the radio cuts again, only then, she said. The girl asked what would happen if they didn't see the flag. Elena paused. Then she said, "Some vehicles don't stop if they're scared. They might not know we're safe." She didn't say the word misidentification. Down below, Fareed stabilized the wounded interpreter again, pressing gauze to his shoulder. The soldiers checked angles on the upper floor. One adjusted a mirror in the west window to catch light. Elena returned to the central hallway and traced the expected path of the convoy on her map. She calculated angles, revised the guess. The margin was narrow. When the radio crackled again, the voice was closer, sharper now. Still no confirmation. Still no word of civilians. Elena tapped the set once. Nothing. Then silence. She looked toward the rooftop hatch, but didn't call out. The girl hadn't moved. She waited. Just as instructed, the radio flared once more, brief. Half a syllable. Then died. Elena's hand hovered over the switch, but didn't press it. She waited. 30 seconds passed. Then 60. On the rooftop, a bloom of red fire arced into the sky. Straight and clean. The convoy arrived like a thunderclap, engines roaring, tires grinding against broken pavement, armored wheels pushing aside debris without slowing. Dust lifted in great clouds as the lead vehicle pulled up outside the records building. Soldiers dismounted in practiced rhythm, weapons drawn, sweeping corners that had already been cleared hours ago. Their movements were sharp, controlled, too late and too loud. Inside, no one moved until Elena Ramirez stood and walked to the door. Her hands were empty. Her uniform was stained from blood, soot, and ash. The peacekeeping patch had been removed from her sleeve and stuffed into her pocket earlier that morning. She kept it there, crumpled. It no longer meant anything here. The first soldier through the door pointed his weapon, saw the civilians huddled in the back, and froze. His commanding officer followed seconds later, scanning the room, eyes taking in the barricades. The wounded interpreter, the silent calm of a space that had seen chaos and held. He looked directly at Elena. His tone wasn't aggressive, just baffled. Who was in charge here? Elena answered simply, "I was." He nodded, slow, and said, "We'll sort it with your CO." She didn't respond. He turned away before she could pee-wall. Later, back at the temporary forward base, the debrief ran long. The wounded had been transferred to field medics. The civilians were bused to a shelter north of the checkpoint. Elena remained behind in the last row of the operations tent as the officer presented the mission summary. On the screen, a bullet point list scrolled past casualty count. Area secured. Assets recovered. The list included a junior lieutenant who hadn't been at the site. He was credited with stabilizing the zone and coordinating with locals for defensive layout. No mention of Elena. Not her name. Not her title. Not even civil affairs. A young soldier from her group, the one who had watched her every movement during those long hours in the building, raised his voice once. He said that wasn't right. He said she had. The officer cut him off. "We logged it. Private. Move on." Elena didn't turn around. She just watched the map rotate on the screen as if the ground had shifted without her. Afterward, someone handed her a mug of coffee. It was too hot to drink, and she didn't try. She held it between both hands, seated near the edge of the platform, away from the others. The radio crackled with unrelated traffic. Names were called out. Orders reassigned. Nobody called hers. She unfolded the map once more. Only briefly. The red marker she had placed still held rough lines across the corridor, coordinates matching the convoy's final route. She folded it again and slid it back into her pocket. Same place it had always been. The paper was softer now, the edges worn. Behind her, voices continued the briefs. Rotations. A joke about chow. She didn't interrupt. When the sun started to drop, casting sharp light through the plastic wall of the tent, she stood. The coffee remained untouched. Her name never made the board. The records building looked different now, though nothing had been repaired. Bullet holes still pocked the north hallway. Scorch marks climbed halfway up the stairwell. Dried blood stained the grout near the filing cabinets. But the space had settled into something steady. A triage station had been set up on the first floor. Tarps divided the rooms where glass used to hang. Folding cots lined the walls. Someone had dragged in crates from a depot down the road, filled with gauze. Salt crackers. Iodine. The light filtered in unevenly, yellow and soft through smoke-scuffed windows. Elena Ramirez moved between the beds, her sleeves rolled, boots dusty. She carried one end of a stretcher while a medic held the other. The weight shared without words. A man with burns across his forearms gritted his teeth as they settled him into a cot. Elena adjusted the tarp behind him to block the sun. She nodded once. He nodded back. The young soldier who had nearly broken during the first assault now helped distribute water. He passed silently between the beds, unfolding blankets, handing out ration packs. He didn't ask what needed doing. He just did it. When he caught her glance across the room, he didn't smile. He only dipped his head and kept moving. On the wall near the front desk, her map had been pinned up with strips of medical tape. The edges curled from use. New notations had been added in red pen others' hands, marking updates along the same ridgelines she had traced. No one asked where the map had come from. It had become part of the room, her old compass. Cracked, but still functional. Rested on a supply crate near the back entrance. A medic used it now to line up new corridor routes. Turning it gently on the wood before placing flags on a printed overlay, Elena had not reclaimed it. Outside, a teenager climbed the rooftop with practiced steps. The same girl who had once held the flare now held a signal panel, flashing coded light toward the road checkpoint to the west. A convoy answered with a horn. Elena walked past the door without slowing. A voice behind her asked when she was rotating out. She didn't answer. She adjusted a corner of the tarp where wind had pulled it loose, checked the supply ledger with her thumb, and crossed to the far wall where more civilians waited. She stayed in motion. She was never meant to be the one they followed. No one gave her command. No report carried her name. And no ceremony marked what she held together. But when the systems failed and the orders stopped, she stayed. She listened when others shouted. She saw what others missed. And when the moment came to choose between walking away or standing still, she moved toward the need without asking who would notice. This wasn't a story of medals or ranks. It was about quiet resolve, about holding a line no one else saw forming. And in the end, the building still stood, not because someone gave the order, but because she made the decision to remain. If her story stayed off the record, that never made it less true. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect. Share your thoughts. Or follow for more quiet, powerful stories like this one.